You know, when I said the Doctor was a non-binary bisexual disaster icon, I didn't mean literally. Hello interwebs, I hope you're all doing well, and welcome to my review to the third and final of the 2023 Doctor Who special starring David Tennant as the 14th Doctor, this episode titled The Giggle. Whew, had a long intro there. I tried to do it all in one breath. That was a bad move. As per usual, I will stay spoiler-free up front and get into spoilers in just a moment, but, you know, considering this is the regeneration episode, and most of my thoughts on this episode are actually going to be about that regeneration, as I think most of the internet's is going to be, I will probably not stay spoiler-free for too terribly long, but let's get into it. Speaking on, I will talk about that regeneration at the beginning of the spoiler section, because, oh boy, do we have a lot to say there, but just talking about this episode's story as a whole, I found it to be rather fun. Neil Patrick Harris as the Celestial Toymaker, a villain from way back in the first Doctor's era, was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed his performance. I feel like Neil Patrick Harris, when he's going into his most hammy and theatrical and over the top, is a hit or miss for a lot of people. And for me, Neil Patrick Harris is generally a hit. Even though How I Met Your Mother has aged fairly poorly over the years, I always still enjoy his performance, if not necessarily the character of Barney. So I really like Neil Patrick Harris's acting. He's just over-the-top stuff. His accent throughout all of this were just a lot of fun. And I think he brought a certain amount of menace and playfulness that I think is appropriate for this character. And I also feel like the episode did a good enough job of making me feel the weight and fear and worry of him, despite me never having seen the original First Doctor storyline that this character appeared in. And so I found that to be a lot of fun, and I thought there was some good back and forth and some fun little games as you would expect with this type of character. And so everything to do with him, I found great. And then on top of that, the emotional stuff that we've been sort of building kind of the background with the 14th Doctor over these past three specials of the weight of the world on him, and him sort of like feeling this, just everything going on for the past few decades of his life, at least in terms of decades on screen, I think like really felt like an appropriate arc for his character. However, the rest of this episode, beyond those things, more felt like they were trying to set up the, like, Whoniverse and the big spin-offs. I won't talk about some of the other ones that I think are set up here, but most certainly, this is in the trailers. It's very clear that they're kind of trying to set up, like, a unit spin-off. Like, we got Kate Lethbridge-Stewart and then some of the ancillary characters to what would a unit spin-off look like. And so I'm sort of like, oh, this is you setting that up and not really necessarily telling this story. And then on top of that, there was a bit of like, there's a very clear moment in this episode that's a like, let's catch everyone up who missed all the Doctor Who stuff between, you know, the last David Tennant series and now, and it went through all of that stuff, and it felt like that, and it's like, I'm sitting here being like, it's got some emotional heft to it, but it just was like, all right, this just feels like it's doing a lot of, like, bringing people up to speed and setting things off for the future, which, you know, I think is a detriment to this story on its own terms, and as a result, the resolution of this story, and many, many levels, I think, was left feeling quick and easy, and I felt myself being like, okay, we're just kind of wrapping this up then, and just kind of yada-yadaing a lot of different things. And so while I found the setup fun, I found moments fun, I found Neil Patrick Harris to be a good time, and David Tennant and Donna Noble are always phenomenal. On the whole, I do think that this episode feels a little bit rushed and not really, and trying to do too much. It kind of makes me really appreciate last week's episode even more. I think it's my favorite of the three because it was so isolated, was just like, let's deal with Donna and the Doctor, whereas now it's like so many other things that it's trying to do that I think it buckles a little bit under the weight of it, even more so than the first episode of this 3-episode specials did. That all being said, I have many, many, many more thoughts, and for that, we are going to need to go into spoilers. So, if you have not seen the episode, get off here because there is a huge thing that we need to talk about, and I'm not going to save it to the end because I need to talk about it now. Alright, that was your last warning. Bi-generation Doctor. So we have David Tennant splitting off into David Tennant and Ncuti Gatwa. First things first, I need to just pick off a nitpick here. In the subtitles, after they split into the two different Doctors, the subtitles started calling David Tennant's Doctor the 10th Doctor, which is incorrect. Like, even if you wanted to be like, let's denote them as like the 14th and 15th, but he's the 14th Doctor. He's a different Doctor than the 10th. So whoever did the subtitles, I'm sorry, I'm not meaning to hate on you. You're probably doing your job as best you can, but that bothered me. Anywho, that was a weird nitpick to start off with, but yeah. I have very mixed feelings on splitting the Doctor this way, and I am sure most of the internet is going to be as well, and I think this is definitely going to be the decision that is going to set people at odds and going to be the most contentious, and more than likely is probably the thing that Russell T Davies was referring to. He kind of hinted at, like, there's a big change in the mythos here. This is definitely it. Let me talk about first the setup for this, because we have the Toymaker shooting him and then he just pulls into two different doctors. And not that I necessarily need an explanation on every single nitty-gritty ground, but it felt just weird that he would just have a bi-generation now, and there's no real difference other than I guess he was the 14th Doctor before. And so like that element of it, like the mechanics of why this happened now, just felt wonky and not... Now, even if you did want to ignore like the sciencey wincy part of it, like emotionally it felt like it wasn't properly set up, because it looked like David Tennant's Doctor was ready to go for once. And he even said L-on-Z, which I actually was like, when I was watching, like, I was ready to cry. I was like, I'm getting all emotional. I'm like, oh, David Tennant's leaving again. And I thought they were going to say something of him being like, oh, I'm ready to go. But he said L-on-Z, and I'm like, oh, this is great. And then they split, and I'm like, the reason I have such contentious thoughts on this is on multiple levels. On the one hand, I think the biggest thing for me is it just kind of does a little bit of disservice to Ncuti Gatwa, because now I'm going to be talking about, even for this review, David Tennant, and the stuff going on with David Tennant, and the things that the David Tennant Doctor is setting up at the end of this episode, when really, Ncuti Gatwa deserves to have his time in the sun, and for him to be the first openly gay actor to play the Doctor, or the first black actor to play the Doctor... Apologies, I should say second black actor to play the Doctor, because Joe Martin played the fugitive Doctor, so more technically, I mean the first black Doctor is the lead of the series. To then be like, oh, his moment is now overshadowed by, like, people's favorite Doctor. And now you kind of split the audience here on being like, well, look, my favorite Doctor's still hanging around doing things potentially set up to be part of the unit spinoff that they're clearly setting up here, or maybe even a whole other spinoff with him going and having fun with Donna Noble's family. Though considering Donna does kind of like get a job at unit, like offered one, it seems like, again, they're setting up the unit spinoff with that, with him popping in now and then. Sort of like Granddad Doctor come and having a guest appearance whenever they need help. It feels like it just does a disservice to Ncuti Gatwa. Like, he didn't get a time to shine here. And I will say this. Ncuti Gatwa was phenomenal in the few moments that he got to shine in this episode. They are very clearly bringing in his sort of like, you know, gay-coded side to the Doctor with him that I think feels appropriate given the actor, and that sort of more, you know, open physical energy, like he was very physical with David Tennant, and I think that that's really nice. Like, having a Doctor who is more physical, I think is fitting on multiple levels for, like, the Doctor's arc, who Ncuti Gatwa is, the sort of discussion around needing to be more open and vulnerable that we need to have in our world generally, especially for men. I think that there's so many great options with that choice for his character that I really, really love. And so every moment they got to show was great. And I also loved the physicality of them splitting, like them like having each like half of each other's clothing as they split. That was very clever. Though, to be frank, I would have much preferred David Tennant be in his underwear, or his pants as they say in the UK. I don't know, I guess it's weird enough for the Doctor. It's not like that big a deal, but it did feel weird that Ncuti Gatwa was running around in his underwear, or pants as they say, in his first appearance. Again, it's fitting of the Doctor in any incarnation to have like a weird opening regeneration event, so it's not that big a deal. But I don't know, if I was making the choice, I'd be like, let's have David Tennant wear the underwear, and because like gives Ncuti Gatwa a little bit more dignity at the beginning, but it's not that big a deal. Anywho, again, he just felt a little overshadowed by what we're all feeling with David Tennant. And the other thing too is, now that we know David Tennant's sticking around, whether or not he appears in the unit spinoff, if they do a unit spinoff or not, or he just happens to come up whenever, it just feels like, you know, especially for people who are like grew up with David Tennant's generation, you know, me, for example, being like, but I want to see David Tennant. You know, I love Ncuti Gatwa, he's fun, but like, I miss David Tennant. And it just goes to this constant, I think it's a Russell T Davies thing, but I think it's just our cultural fixation on David Tennant. Like, again, David Tennant, my favorite Doctor, love him, love the man. Every time he shows up in something, I'm excited. Good Omens, Jessica Jones. He is phenomenal, and I want him in things, but I feel like we need to be able to move on. And considering that Russell T Davies has like another 10th Doctor out there, like we had the Doctor that went off with Rose Tyler in at the end of series 4, and now we have another David Tennant Doctor, and theoretically we could tell stories with the 10th Doctor and 14th Doctor. We have like Big Finish or comics or whatever. Like, there's just a lot of like David Tennant in the Doctor Who media now, and it's just sort of like, we need to be able to move on. And it feels like the message of this series should have been like, we get our nostalgia, we have a few moments with this, and then we move on to the next thing. But now it just feels like a little bit of like nostalgia gazing. And that being said, the reason that I'm split on this is I actually really do like the message of what this is saying with this episode, that like the Doctor deserves to settle down, he deserves to have a family, he deserves to have a moment to rest and actually like do rehab, like as Donna Noble says. Like that message I think is actually a really beautiful message. And the final scene we get with David Tennant, you know, telling stories around the dinner table and being an uncle and being part of a family, and the moments with Bernard Cribbins sort of being off just shooting moles was very sweet as well. I spoke about in my review last time that I thought, oh, well, I'll talk about Bernard Cribbins in my next review because he'll clearly be in it, but I guess Russell T Davies confirmed that he was not healthy enough to shoot this episode, even they shot some stuff, which, you know, to have him be around and shooting moles and being alive, I think was a very nice, like, sort of sweet little moment for him at the end, to sort of send up Bernard Cribbins as he passed away, which is very sweet. So, like, that scene was really wonderful. The emotional climax of it was really wonderful. I thought that was a really beautiful thing to do. And again, I'm not gonna lie and say there isn't a part of me that's kind of glad that I'm gonna be able to see David Tennant and Donna Noble getting to have adventures again, whether that be, you know, in appearances here and there on other Doctor Who shows, or he gets his own spin-off or whatever. Like, yeah, I want that. I'm not gonna lie and say that there's not a part of me that's not gonna be excited about that. But it just feels like it does a disservice to Ncuti, and it does a disservice to like what we should be saying with Doctor Who. Like, Doctor Who is a show about change and difference. So I guess I'm really of two minds about it, and it's hard for me to like have a final say on it right now, because I need to, number one, know what they're gonna do with this. Like, if we never see David Tennant again, he's just there, like, maybe this will be, maybe it'll end up more for me, or like he appears in things. Like, I just don't know what the goal and aim of this is, and so it's kind of hard for me to have final resolution on, because I like the story aspect of it. I think it worked fairly well in the episode in terms of like the narrative being spun, but I don't know where we're going with it, and I don't know what we're trying to do with it, and I worry that it just is going to do a disservice to Ncuti, who deserves to have his own say, and Doctor Who deserves to have its own main focus, and having like a split fandom, a split Doctor. And it won't be a split fan. I mean, sure, there's going to be some people like, I'll never have a black Doctor. I'm sure there'll be those people. David Tennant. But they'll even complain about that being SJW nonsense. Whatever. Regardless, like, I don't even necessarily mean a split fandom, but like split attention, split focus on that sort of stuff. So it felt weird. Going in even further, like, I mean, that's the thing that we all have to talk about, right? We have to talk about the split, we have to talk about that. Like, that's the thing. To talk more about the episode itself, I actually, like I said, really enjoyed most of the beginning of this, like, the first half of this, the build-up of it. Neil Patrick Harris, again, he could be hit or miss. If you don't love him, I get it. But his whole bit about, like, you know, getting on the first television screen, and there being, like, the giggle that's in all of the television screens, that felt very Russell T Davies. Like, we've seen that sort of stuff with Russell T Davies before. It's like this weird thing like embedded at the beginning of time, and even Moffat did some of that stuff too. So like that felt very good. I'm not sure how I feel about the television screen bit, because there's this sort of ongoing thing with the toy maker being like, oh look, they cancel, and there's like talking about cancel culture a little bit there. And to the degree I like the message of, like, you know, the toy maker's idea of there being winners and losers and everyone's a winner. Like, I actually like that message. You know, I always get very, very tepid around like things trying to take on cancel culture, because usually they're very bad. They're very bad. But this episode didn't really necessarily seem like it was going after like cancel culture generally, but using it as like a piece of a larger puzzle, in terms of like this idea of winners and losers. And I've been talking about in my main channel with a lot of my video essays, this like idea of predator and prey stories. Now, I really dislike predator and prey stories of like, you know, this like, you know, there's we're victims or heroes, that sort of thing. Like, I think like having that idea of like our society is all about like the winners, I think was actually an astute observation. And I thought that was a cool way to use the toy maker. The only thing that I disliked in terms of how that sort of theming came up was the Doctor sort of like saying is that part of it, like inherent part of the human race. And that's part of like Russell T Davies always kind of had that element too in his writing back in the original series, of his original run, I should say. And this idea that like humans can be brilliant, but we can also be awful. And I do think that is true to a degree, but I don't know, as I've gone over the last few years, I've become more and more skeptical things that are like human beings are actually evil or like animalistic at our core. When actually I think like human beings are actually rather caring at our core, and it's sometimes society and the incentives that are placed in front of us by things like capitalism, that are what sort of makes us more individualistic and wishing to push each other away. Things that we build for sure, but the incentives that we build for ourselves rather than who we are at our core. And I think that sort of like gets things reversed. And so I've been skeptical of those types of narratives generally. And I think the toy maker being used is like, yeah, he's like playing into this society of winners and losers and this idea that we all need to be the winner, but less so with like it being like an intrinsically human thing that sort of gets alluded to in the rest of the episode. Also, I'm sure there's going to be like the people being like, oh, look, he's clearly making an anti-vax reference with the anti-like armband thing. And you know, this is Russell T Davies. I think people are just gonna have to get on board with that. And as someone who grew up on Star Trek, and Star Trek's very overt messaging and stuff, it doesn't bother me. But you know, there are gonna be people, even people who agree with the message, who are just gonna be like, this is very on the nose, very overt. And I just sort of sit here being like, you know, it's not Orphan 55, whatever the 14th, 13th Doctor storyline was, where she sort of literally gave a speech like, climate change is coming, we're all gonna die unless you can change something. Like, it doesn't feel like it hits that note of like being so preachy, but it's just sort of like, yeah, this connects to that thing, like, be aware of that. I am less bothered by that sort of aspect of writing being a little bit more on the nose. I mean, you know, Doctor Who, and I think more front-facing like science fiction that is sort of meant to be mass consumed can be a little bit more overt. You know, I go, when I want subtlety, I go to like less like adventure-based shows like Star Trek or Doctor Who. So I personally, for me, that all works. But your mileage may vary, even if you agree with the message. You know, for me, it's just sort of big adventure shows that are meant for broad audiences, I think can stand to be a little bit more overt in what they're trying to say, rather than like maybe I don't know, like I'm trying to think of like a more like The Expanse or something that can be a little bit subtler with its storytelling. Again, that's a me thing. That's a style choice. Your mileage may vary. Going on with other stuff here, I loved seeing like certain elements of like with, again, if we're setting up the sort of unit spinoff, the pieces here are great. We have that one robot, I think the Vex, I forget what it was called off the top of my head, but the robot there is like an interesting little thing that we can like play with the unit. You have Kate Lethbridge-Stewart, who I always love, even when she's not in great stories, looking at the sort of like stuff with the Flux. We also have Mel, who I didn't know, I've never seen her stories, I haven't watched much classic Who, but she was great in what I saw her here for, and so I'm curious to see people who know her more, what their opinion on her appearance is here, but I think she was great from what I saw, and it'd be fun to have her around. Shirley is also really fun. I also did like that the TARDIS is joining the 21st century, as they say, and having a ramp onto the TARDIS, which I think is great, and again, it kind of goes to this discussion that we were having with Davros, you know, back before these specials aired, and so I'm glad that the Davros, like, changing his from having a disability, at least when we're showing him, I think is not the only like discussion of disability that we're having in Doctor Who. So like I think that was really great. Like all that stuff was a lot of fun. The other elements of this episode that I really liked too were the stuff between Donna and the Doctor, even before the regeneration, or bigeneration as they say, where, you know, she's sort of talking, she's like, I get it, you never slow down, you never take the time, and you never take care of yourself. And Donna sort of seeing all the stuff that happens with the Toymaker, where he's like going through the history of like the Moffat and Chibnall eras, which I thought was really, I actually really liked that bit where, like, you know, he's like showing like all your companions die, and David Tennant always has like it's like, but you know, her consciousness lives on, or, you know, she got to die of old age, and the Toymaker saying, well, that's all right then, in an American accent, as the subtitles clearly pointed out, and sort of like being like, oh yeah, you keep going on, you never deal with the pain of this, and it's not being about like, look, all your companions die, because that kind of trope always like comes up in a lot of these things, like, look, all the people that you go, they die, and it's all your fault. Like, it's not that guilt that he's carrying, it's more he's not handling the weight of those pains on him, that he's like, yeah, they're fine, and he can just move on. And I thought that was a new spin on that I really liked, and Donna sort of cluing in on the Doctor needing to take that time. Again, I really liking that idea. Then we kind of get to the resolution of this story, where they're at Unit, and I love the sequence Neil Patrick Harris dancing around. That was a lot of fun, turning people into balls, the guns turning into flowers. That was a fun little bit for me. Then we got to the bigeneration, which I already said my piece on. But the other element of that ending that I'm not so sure on is like the game of catch and him losing the game of catch. You know, I don't know. It felt like the idea of a game of catch that decides it. That's fine with me. I love that. That works on multiple levels. But it just feels like, oh, he just didn't catch a ball. Like, it feels like there should have been some piece of it where they outthought him, or like some sort of element of it. And I guess the element is like they're playing together against him. So it's 2 versus 1. And I did like the moment too where Shooty shoots it and David says like, "Ah, I'm on your side." But I don't know, it just felt like there needed to be a little bit more of an emotional resonance other than like they throw a ball and he just misses it. Like, I thought there was gonna be some clever bit, like they threw the ball and it's falling down to the ground, and since, you know, this toy maker can teleport, we clearly saw that a minute ago, he would just be like, actually, you didn't actually win, and he like teleports down to the bottom of the skyscraper and then throws the ball down there, and the doctors have to like, you know, catch it from like weird thing or use the TARDIS or whatever. I don't know, it just felt like there could have been more with that than there was. Also, what is interesting here too is just the small things, like we get allusions to some larger thing. I mean, we obviously had the boss referenced by the Beep the Meep in the first episode. The toy maker makes reference to something that he ran away from this episode, and then something grabs that master's tooth that apparently the master is residing within with the toy maker at the end there. So I'm curious to see what they're building with that. That's clearly going to be a probably larger story on the next season of Doctor Who. But yeah, I'm curious about what that's going to be. So overall, I think to kind of wrap out this review, because I've kind of been jumping all over the places, I think what I have to settle on is this is a fun episode. I have moments that I like. And I did like the emotional arc that we got with David Tennant's Doctor, not only in this episode, but over the past 3 specials. It really felt like there was a good emotional charge into like where they were kind of resolving with the Doctor, with him having a family. I thought it was very sweet, very wonderful, and I like that as an ending for the Doctor. However, I feel like some of the other choices, like this episode being very much a unit spinoff, very much a, like maybe we'll have the David Tennant around because we still like David Tennant, so we always have to have a David Tennant Doctor around, so maybe he can appear in his own spinoff or a unit spinoff. It was just a lot of that setup sort of stuff, and I think it did a disservice to Ncuti Gatwa getting to have his moment. And who knows, maybe the Christmas special that comes in a few weeks will be like really his moment, but I do feel like it does a disservice to him a little bit. And so this episode just felt like when it was focused in on what it was trying to do, the message with the David Tennant's Doctor, and having fun with the toy maker, that worked. When it tried to do other things, like set up unit, set up this generation, set up Ncuti Gatwa, I think it did a disservice to all of those things. And so I feel like that's kind of my ending on it. Also, I will say, I should at least say here, you know, I'm sure people were expecting, since this is the 60th special, there being a lot more cameos by a lot of other Doctors. I don't know. As much as I would love to have seen some of the older Doctors, or even, you know, the White Whale would be Christopher Eccleston, though I think Russell T Davies burned that bridge years ago, but that would be the sort of White Whale. But Matt Smith as well, or Peter Capaldi, or even Jodie Whittaker. You know, as much as I would have liked to have those moments, I don't know, there's a part of me that's like, I've seen that a bunch, and I think going simpler works for me. Some people will be disappointed that we didn't get these cameos, didn't get this whole reference to Doctor Who's history for the 60th, but you know, we kind of just got that with the 13th Doctor's regeneration, and so I'm just sort of like, you know, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with that not being the case. But again, your mileage may vary. So yeah, I think that's worth saying. But overall, I liked this episode. I'm excited to see Ncuti, because what we saw of him was fantastic. And you know, a part of me will always be glad that I get to have more David Tennant, because he is my Doctor, and so I'm glad for that. But I do have some hesitations, and I guess a lot of it's going to rely on, what are we doing next? What's the plan? And I think once I hear that, my like looking back on this, I'll have different feelings maybe in a year or so when I know more of that stuff. But for right now, I'm sort of sitting in like, I have very mixed feelings. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below, did you like this episode, or did you hate this regeneration or not? I'd love to know all of that. Beyond all that, I hope you all take care of yourselves, my friends, and as always, live long and prosper.